It's about the sun, our brightest star of all. And in the end, the video you just have seen explains already a lot about my presentation. Because in the end, what you have seen is miners at work in a mine, mining something, most probably coal, fossil fuels. And at a certain moment, Snow White is coming in. Snow White, for me, to represent more like white light, solar energy, the sun, photovoltaics, renewables. And what is happening then? She's starting to spank the ass of the miner. So that's what's happening real life right now. Renewables are starting to spank the ass of the fossil fuels. That's the reason we're going to focus on solar today. Solar photovoltaics. First, a bit of history. Then I'm also trying to give you, so history is about the past, but then I want to go to the future, of course. And in between, I just want to give you a good overview of what the role could be of solar for the energy transition. It's clearly very important for our energy transition. And then I will go to the future. Okay, first some history, and I would like to start with a question. And I can see your hands, that's okay. So how old do you think, or when do you think, how long time ago do you think that the first solar panel ever was installed? Is it 30 years ago? So please raise your hands if you think so. That's already good. 70 years ago? I really see some hands, like 10% of the room was probably. 100 years ago? Maybe a bit more. 140 years ago? A bit less, I would say. Well, 1884. So 140 years ago, it's even like a birthday this year. It's every year birthday, but it's like a special birthday. And the picture you see on the right is a roof in New York City in 1884. That system was installed over there. And on the left, you see a copy-paste from the paper in which they explained 1 year before that the technology being used in the panel on the right. Ecologically, at that moment, it was already interesting. Of course, you're converting photons that you get from the sun into electrons. And the photons are cheap, are for free, so you just make cheap electricity in the end. Technologically speaking, you did not convert too many photons into electrons at that moment. Efficiency-wise, we were talking about less than 1%, way less than 1%. And economically speaking, it was expensive. If you look at the bottom, over there, you see very thick copper cables. At this moment, that would be very expensive. So clearly, it was a good start, but it needed some improvements. It took then 100 years where solar has been used a lot in remote locations to improve it. Remote locations where the alternative was also expensive. Think about coast guards, where they have buoys, where they typically had batteries inside of one of those buoys, which meant that at a certain moment, every 6 months, a boat has to come by, take out the battery, drop it in the sea typically, put a new battery. If you could put there just a solar panel, it would work for a long time. Space, another application that has been focused on very much in the 50s and the 60s. Railways, telecommunication. Australia was very fast with that because, of course, most people are living at the side of Australia, not in the middle, where you also need telecommunication and railways, so they were using a lot of solar. And it could be expensive at that moment. But then by the 80s, we had another oil crisis, or one of the first oil crises, energy crisis. And Jimmy Carter, he was one of those presidents who realized, well, fossil fuels is maybe not something we're going to use for a long time anymore. We should start to think about other things. So he installed, and as you see on the left, next to the White House for the very first time, solar panels. Unfortunately, he was a Democrat, and then there was Ronald Reagan, a Republican, who came into power 7 years later, and the first thing he did, he removed the solar panels. And in the end, I would say it kind of makes sense, because technologically, those panels were much better as compared to 100 years earlier, but economically, they were still expensive. The same story goes on. In 2010, we had Barack Obama. We all remember and did not forget about Barack Obama, if we think about these times. But Barack Obama, one of the things he did is also installing new solar panels on the White House in Washington, D.C. You can still see them. You can even, over there, this is a top view picture via Google Maps of the White House. If you do the same thing on the palace here in Brussels, It's going to be blurred, but somehow it's okay to really look that close to the White House. Anyway, in 2016, Donald Trump came into play, again, from a Democrat to a Republican. And we all know Donald Trump, the Donald. He's not very much in favor of renewables. He's very much in favor of coal. He did a lot of things in those 4 years against renewables, but he forgot one thing. The solar panels are still on the roof of the White House. And I would also say it makes sense in the end. Because in the meanwhile, ecologically, it always made sense. Technologically, these were really good solar panels. And economically, that's the cheapest energy production technology that we have for the moment. And if there's maybe one thing that Donald knows something about, it's money. So he has chosen to keep it there because it made him quite some money. That's what you see here. Here you see the growth of solar energy for the last 20 years, the total cumulative installations worldwide. And since 2009 up to 2022, so just 2 years ago, it expanded 50-fold, so times 50. Also, and that's because of the cost. People really think about their wallets typically. It's that cheap that it really became very much interesting. In 2022, we even surpassed 1 terawatt peak. And that doesn't say a lot to most of you, but 1 terawatt peak, it's about 150 nuclear power plants. And there's still more nuclear power plants on Earth, but you will see where we're going in the next 27 years to 2050. We're going to expand like crazy. If I put it in a different way, also this exponential growth again, and since COVID, we all know exponential growth. Of course, this is a bit slower exponential growth. But if I go from the bottom to the top here, you see the same exponential growth, and you see a lot of blue. And blue means silicon. These kind of panels, you have all seen already on the roofs around here or in other places in Belgium or somewhere in Europe. This is silicon. This is what you're using in your smartphones. This is what I am using here in my laptop. And you even have it in your cars all the time. Silicon is a good choice for PV, but you will see that very small green part, thin film, has maybe also quite some future. I will come back to that. Okay, this was some history, just to indicate to you that solar has a very bright history already of 140 years. And also a bright future. So about the energy transition, and I'm using ET, energy transition, abbreviated is also ET, extraterrestrial, and I do it on purpose, because I guess most of you have seen ET. If I do this with my students, it doesn't always work. It's a movie from '86. It's a great movie, I would say. It's about a boy named Elliot, and Elliot is the very first person who meets ET, who finds ET in the woods and says to ET, please come to my home, we're going to make friends, we're going to become friends, and we're going to have some fun. That's what Elliot said. All the other older humans around Elliot, all the adolescents around him, typically were very afraid of ET. And that's what is also happening with the energy transition. Energy transition means change, and we humans typically don't like change. So most of us are quite afraid of the energy transition. And ET, the same thing, so we should also be more like Elliot and really embrace the energy transition. And that's what I'm going to try to prove to you, that we know quite well what is happening, not everything, but parts we know, and don't be afraid, there is technology, it can solve it. Okay, this is the issue that we all know. It's about, I always have this one, carbon dioxide, 1 carbon, 2 oxides. Being emitted because we are burning a lot of fossil fuels. We started after the Industrial Revolution with coal. That's the first exponential growth. Then oil came in after the First World War, and then gas came in after the Second World War, which I think is also interesting, because this could mean we are in some kind of time that also could be called a world war. So maybe renewables will be very visible in just a few years if you look back at this time. But still, we are burning coal, oil, and gas, and that's emitting CO2. And that's something we have to avoid. Good news is by using renewables, of course, wind or solar. And I'm going to focus on solar. The good news is, if I look at electricity, and this is a picture of 2022, until 2022, where you see that since 2022, within Europe, most of the electricity is coming from solar plus wind together. I have to make a trick because I have to take solar and wind together, but still, renewables have a higher share of electricity as compared to the others, as compared to oil, gas, coal, and even nuclear at that moment. But it's electricity. Another question. Do you know how much, if you look at the complete energy system that we have, what percentage of that is electricity? So is it 10%? No one? Just a few. 20%. A few more. 40%. Again, a few more. And 80%? Just a little. So most, I think, we're thinking 80%. 40%. Unfortunately, it's only 20% for the moment. On the left, you see what the case was in 2020. You see 20% of electricity, still 66% of fossil fuels at that moment. And that's, in principle, the reason we are focusing that much on electrification for the moment, because for electricity, it's easy. We do have renewables, they are cheap, they can be rolled out, and we can just easily decarbonize electricity. But it's more than electricity, and that's the question, or that's the difficulty. So we are electrifying a lot, and I will come back to that very soon, just to make sure that we can use more electricity. That's what we see on the right, where they made an estimate, a global estimate of where we could go in our electrification. In this case, it's about 51% of electricity and still a few other things. But you see, electrification. We at EnergyVille, we are doing the same thing. We call it our PETS 2050. So it's a path that we have been calculating, modeling to 2050, where we just push the energy system to become carbon neutral by 2050. So we just tell it, become carbon neutral in an as efficient way as possible and at low cost. The lowest societal cost you can make it. Cross-factor, which means we are using all the different energy vectors. Cross-sector, which means we're talking to all the different industrial sectors that you have to get information which is relevant. And cross-border, because in the end, Belgium is just too small to think about Belgium. We have a lot of countries around it, and we're going to exchange energy, of course. What you already can see here is what the situation was in 2020, what it could be in 2030, and what it could be in 2050. And 3 different scenarios. I'm not going to explain the 3 different scenarios. You can have a look at the QR code if needed. But in the end, you can see it as some kind of sensitivity analysis. But the beauty that you see, if we go for 2050, first of all, it is possible to use less energy. You see that we are decreasing our energy consumption by 1/3 by using way more electricity. Also here, you see the electrification, and in the case of Belgium, it could become like 80 or 85% of electricity. Could. Again, this is a model where we push the system to be as efficient and as fast and low cost as possible. In reality, humans are involved, and it will take a bit more time, to be honest. But it is possible. The good news is, I will now explain a little bit more in different sectors what this means. My next slide will explain what happens for buildings and for transport. And there I would say it's very clear what is happening. It's just about using technology and rolling it out, taking time, but it can be done. And then I will move to industry and agriculture. And those 2 are a bit more shady for the moment. Industry, we know kind of what is going to happen by 2050, but not specific yet. And agriculture is not yet even included in this model. So that's something else that we have to work on. But still, okay. If I first have a look at buildings, so residential and commercial buildings, that's to the left. Again, the same thing, 2020, 2030, 2050. And you see a lot of electrification and more energy efficiency, so gain in energy efficiency. If I talk about buildings, the simple one is heat pumps. The more heat pumps we use, the more efficient we become. A heat pump is 3 times as efficient on average, 3 times as efficient as normal central heating as we know it. So the more heat pumps we can use, the lower electricity or the less electricity we will need, the less energy we will need. And it's, by the way, interesting if we should start to use less energy in Belgium. Think about the other places in the world that are still developing and will need more energy. Transport, on the right side, Very similar, we all know it, we can see it now, finally. Electrical vehicles are taking over, slowly but certainly. Still a smaller percentage till 2030, but by 2050 it is possible to electrify transportation completely, have a lot of electrical vehicles. And thanks to that, an electrical vehicle, an electromotor, again, is 3 times as efficient as compared to a combustion engine. So it's a lot about energy efficiency. I know there are other challenges about materials being used and these kind of things. We are tackling those as well, and we will solve them as well. But just in energy efficiency, it makes sense to focus on electrical vehicles. So that's what's happening. So for these 2 sectors, I would say we do have a roadmap on how we can optimize things and move to a new energy system. Let's clear on the left side, industry. Industry, we would like to electrify as well. It's more difficult because typically you need like high temperatures. High temperatures with electricity is not always easy to be done. So typically, if you go from 2020 to 2030, the change is very small at this moment. But if you go from 2030 to 2050, there we expect some innovations that we know that are coming, which will help for electrification. And the other thing that you hear about a lot in the newspapers and on the news is green molecules. Green hydrogen, green methanol, green ammonia, I don't care. Some hydrogen carrier that can be used and it can be made in a green way. Because in the end, hydrogen is already used in industry a lot. But typically it's made by methane or another kind of gas in a not so green way. So we should start to use solar and wind. And that's the thing. For the 3 sectors I've been discussing now, we will need quite some electricity, we will need quite some wind and solar. Luckily, this exponential growth we have seen from 2000 to 2022 can continue. That's possible. So we can really foresee this green electricity. And then the last one, the question mark, agriculture. It's a lot in the news. We did not study it yet very well, to be honest. It's something we have to investigate more. So in our next model, we bring these typically every 2 years. In the beginning, we were very much focused on electricity, but now on the whole energy model. So this will also improve in the next one, for sure. Okay, this was just to give you an idea on where solar could be useful in the energy transition and that we need a lot of solar. And now you could ask yourself the question, of course, there will be some challenges, and those challenges will typically be about sustainability. Will we be able to do that in a sustainable way? To do so, I'm first going to have a quick look at today, if solar actually is already sustainable today, right? Yes or no? And most probably it will be, of course, yes. But it will indeed be challenging to remain sustainable if you think about the huge growth we still have to cope with. So, if I look at today, I can focus on 2 things, 2 different metrics. One of them is the energy payback time. Energy payback time means how long does a solar panel have to be in the field and be operational, give electricity, to have enough electricity that you could fabricate the panel. So to cover the electricity needed to fabricate that panel. That's the energy payback time. If it would be 25 years, it would be stupid to make solar panels, because then you put them in the field for 25 years and you have to wait for the same electricity again. Luckily, it's around 1 year. You see it very nicely on the right graph for different locations in the world. That's around 1 year you need to recover the energy that you use to fabricate those panels. It depends a bit on location because of the installation that you have and also the energy grid itself. The more efficient your energy grid is, the lower your energy payback time will be as well. So that means for a 25-year lifetime that you make 24 years of profit energy-wise. As well in the end cost-wise, of course, but mainly energy-wise. The other metric you could focus on is the carbon footprint. The carbon footprint, the attention there is to bring everything into the picture, from mining, sourcing the materials, to fabricating the product, to transporting the product to a certain location, installing it, and even recycling it. If possible, recycling is included as well. For nuclear, not, because recycling there is a big question mark. But typically, all these steps are included. And then it gives you a carbon footprint in terms of grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour delivered to the grid. CO2 equivalent, because CO2 is indeed the main greenhouse gas that we have, not the worst one. There are others that are even worse. But then we just convert those into CO2 equivalent, and we have a full picture. Same thing about waste and other kind of things. We can convert it into CO2 equivalent, and we get the full complete picture for all energy production technologies that we have. Going from the left to the right, we have all of them, and on the right, you have solar and wind. And you can see it can still go lower, for sure, but these are the lowest values kind of that you can see. The lowest ones in PV and wind are around 10. 10 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour that you generate and deliver to the grid. The only one still lower is nuclear. That's around 5 for the moment. But I'm going to show you one of the things about sustainability and one of the things about growth in the future is reducing the energy payback time and the carbon footprint even more. So we're also going in that direction of 5 grams CO2 equivalent. Because that's indeed happening. So I've already shown you the exponential growth curve from 2000 to 2022. This is what we expect until 2050. I took one from the International Technology Roadmap for PV. We have a lot of these pictures, sometimes even higher. Typically, what we do expect is at least 50 terawatt peak of solar being installed by 2050. Easy to remember, 50 by 2050. That also means that we are multiplying this 1 terawatt peak of 2022 by 50 again. So I was telling you that's equivalent to 150 nuclear power plants, which can become 7,500 nuclear power plants by 2050. That's an enormous amount in 27 years. So the same time 50 you see happening again. That's the beauty. It's in 27 years. Previous slide was in 13 years. So it's a bit slower, but still very, very fast. And possible, because all these estimations, we have been doing that for the last 20 years, and typically, always, reality was more progressive as compared to what we have been estimating. So it could even be higher. I've seen numbers up to 75, and I believe more something in that direction. To show you it's possible, it's not about the colors, it's about these lines. These are the production capacity that we have worldwide. So the plants that we have everywhere in the world that are making solar panels all the time. At this moment, worldwide, last year, we fabricated 350 gigawatt peak. So that's 0.3 terawatt peak, 1/3 of a terawatt peak. And we have to grow to somewhere between 1 and 2 terawatt peak, and then automatically this growth will follow. Well, that's perfectly possible, because we're already at 350, we just have to multiply by a few times over the next years, and that's really actually happening. So it's not that crazy, I would say. But doing so, we see some clear challenges, and those challenges I would also like to address, because that's what we are trying to address right now in the lab. One, a logical one, you hear about it all the time, is about materials, using more sustainable or less materials. For example, if I take this one again, you might see the lines over here, that's silver. We can still use some silver, but if we just do business as usual, at a certain moment, we're going to use the complete mining production of silver worldwide. That does not make sense, that's not possible, it will be too expensive. So we have to replace it. In the case of silver, it could become copper. And copper, you have a lot, that's the beauty. But even if I have a look at the wafer that you see in here, so the blue thingy that you see in there, and if I look at the thickness, that's about 180 micron thick. It can be a little bit less or a little bit more, but this is the hair of your head, and the diameter is somewhere between 60 and 70 micrometers. So a silicon wafer is about 2 to 3 hairs in diameter. What we are also working on is on thin film photovoltaics. And the name says itself, it's a very thin film. Just a few micrometers thick, as you can see. absorbing the same amount of the spectrum as compared to a silicon wafer, which means you need less material, plus typically those materials are grown, fabricated at low temperature. To make one of these, or one of these that you have in your smartphone or in a laptop, you need very high temperatures. You need temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. That means in China, typically, that you need coal or gas to burn and to really heat up the silicon dioxide, sand, to become silicon in the end. So using more thin film is a roadmap to lower energy payback time and lower carbon footprint. Another one is tandem, not using one material to convert photons into electrons, but using two materials on top of each other, where one material can be more focused on blue light and one material can be focused more on red light. By doing so, and that's what you see here, the top cell is converting all the blue photons into electrons, and the bottom cell is converting all the red photons into electrons. I'm simplifying it. It's of course other colors as well, but in total, you get more electrons. You get a higher efficiency. So with a tandem solar cell, you can go for higher efficiencies and more sustainability. You can do it with twice thin film, as you can see here, a perovskite thin film on top of a chalcogenide thin film, still in total being around 5 micrometer thick. So 1/10, 1/15 of a diameter of a hair, so extremely thin in the end. You could do the same thing on silicon, by the way. Eh? This perovskite, you can also put it on silicon and also have very high efficiencies. And high efficiencies are always interesting. So these two ways on how to improve sustainability, material usage, tandem and thin film, will indeed have an impact on energy payback time and carbon footprint. Here you see it. In blue, it is silicon. In blue dashed, it's the tandem approach, and the blue solid line is a normal silicon single junction, one material. Typically, silicon is somewhere over there, having a 25% efficiency and having around 1 year of energy payback time. Going for a tandem approach, you can go a little bit lower, and you could go like 10 months of energy payback time, but a little bit lower. If you want to have the whole profit, you have to go for a full thin film tandem, so twice thin film, then you can get somewhere over there in the end, and have an energy payback time of just a few months. And then you're moving from 1 year to just a few months, to a clear order difference. That's one way to go. It's not going to happen in 1 or 2 years, it will take some time, but it's one way to go to make it even more sustainable for a large amount of solar to be created. Same thing for the carbon footprint. This is the carbon footprint for silicon, very similar to what we have seen if we were comparing all the different energy production technologies. Moving to tandem and having higher efficiency is already reducing the carbon footprint a bit. Moving to thin film is improving it even more, and moving to full thin film tandem would even again be lower and would be around 5 grams CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. So it is possible to even go lower also in carbon footprint. That's for materials. So we do have ideas, a roadmap with the whole industry together on how to move forward to be ready for these huge amounts of solar. The other one is multifunctional integration. The most stupid thing we could do is to put a lot of solar panels on farmland, which we could not use anymore for farmland. Because we're going to need farmland. We're going to have 10 billion of people on this world, so we need farmland, for example. So we really have to think where we are going to integrate it as nicely as possible, but also multifunctional. Not only energy production, but ideally a second or even a third function. Some of them you know, building integrated PV, it means moving away from blue panels on a red roof. That's what we were doing in Belgium a lot in the beginning, in the early days. Blue panels on red roofs, aesthetically speaking, not beautiful. Here, we're aiming for having nice facades, can be even colors, the roof itself becoming a solar panel, these kind of things. I come back to it. Vehicle integrated PV will be an example very soon. Road integrated PV, sound barriers around highways. The beauty of PV being that cheap is you can integrate it everywhere. It's that cheap. So sound barriers around highways is happening right now. Parking lots, above parking lots, which, for example, in France is even obliged right now. On all the parking lots, they will have to install solar, which makes sense for all the EVs. Floating PV on water. The water itself is a reflection, which helps for having higher efficiency. The water itself is a heat sink. Heat is not always the friend of solar PV. And water, especially big reservoirs of water, these days, global warming, they tend to evaporate. Having some solar on top of it could again help. And agrivoltaics also come back to. So 2 examples. Vehicle integrated PV. We do have a battery. We need electricity. So it's kind of a no-brainer to put PV on the roof, on the front side, the trunk, the capot, and the trunk of your car. Completely makes sense. You're never going to be able to cover the complete battery. That does not make sense. That's not the idea. But based on driving style, based on location, it is possible to have 35% of your battery covered, which means that you have a 35% extra range. That's perfectly possible, and it's very local consumption, local production. You don't need the grid, you're just directly using your solar. And secondly, your batteries have a longer lifetime if you're powering them all the time a little bit. It's a positive thing for the battery lifetime. Something we've been doing a lot, especially with the students from KU Leuven, who won the World Solar Race in Australia last year again, on the second time, 3 years ago as well. They typically come to our labs to select the best cells and to finalize their modules on top of their car. The other one, agriculture PV. As I said, we have to keep using farmland. So if you start to install solar on top of farmland, you have to do it in such a way that you can still grow crops underneath. And even use the energy from the solar to have light, have heating, have watering. Use the energy that you can help the crops to grow. Even more can be protection. Typically, in summertime, these summers, there's always a moment that you see in the news that we had some hailstorms, and that then the farmers from Limburg typically are saying, yeah, my pears or my apples are destroyed again. Well, what they're typically using is having some foils above it. These foils could just be photovoltaic solar cells. Not only crops, also cattle, also animals. It is known, it has been studied, that for sheep, they have less stress if they have a shadow from solar panels. And even more, typically, thanks to the solar panels, there's more water infiltrating into the ground, so they even feel less stress because they have better grass. Sheep is a very good example. Goats are a very bad example. You can find a lot of YouTube videos where goats are starting to jump on the solar panels. Not a good idea. They break them. Or they start to eat the cables. Also not a good idea. But you can find a lot of synergies in agriculture and even help farmers who need cheap energy. Okay, that was the second challenge. The third one that we also clearly see is about recyclability, reliability and recyclability. On the left, you see the production capacity that we need worldwide, not until 2050, but until 2100, so an extra 50 years. Because one of the things, of course, is if you install PV panels, they have a certain lifetime, and after that lifetime, in principle, you could start to replace them, and you have to replace them at a certain moment. So you see in our production capacity that we have a first step, which is our expansion of the global market, of the global installations. But at a certain moment, we also will have to start to replace them. The longer the lifetime of your solar panels, the more time we buy for ourselves that we can be prepared to replace them. And also the growth will be a bit slower. So reliability is an important one. The good news is most panels at this moment can be 25 years old. They have a warranty of 25 years old. No one is really taking them out of the field after 25 years. The only moments that we get panels in to recycle is when a hurricane or something passed by and a few panels went flying. happens more often these days, but that's typically the only moment they come in. So reuse, for example, is something that also makes sense. Reliability to have a long lifetime, but you have some additional lifetime anyway. But recyclability is very important. At this moment, solar energy, it's an electrical device. The WEEE is the Waste of Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive by the European Commission, and it says that all the electrical equipment, you have to be able to recover 85% of the weight of those equipments, and you have to be able to recycle 80%. That sounds quite high, but it's 80% of the weight. This one is heavy because it has glass at the rear side and glass at the front side. Glass is easy to recycle. So we need to go much higher than the 80%. We have to be as close as possible to the 100% because otherwise we're going to have indeed quite some waste. Even that, if you would, according to business as usual, current business, if you would start to count how much waste you would have, it would still not be that much, but we want to be as recyclable as possible. So on the left you see reuse. We have been doing this already in Belgium, where we took panels that went over warranty, double-checked, refurbished them a bit, and put them back somewhere on the roof of a supermarket. Honestly speaking, there's no business case for the moment in Europe. There's more of a business case in developing countries, as you might imagine, so it will happen anyway. On the right side, if you want to recycle, what is very important is that you have to be able to disassemble your solar panels. So you have to be able to put the front side glass away and take also the back side glass and everything in between. And then you can start to recycle the different parts. Unfortunately, until 10 years ago, what we tried to do is to attach everything very closely together to make sure it could not be assembled anymore. So now we know that recycling is important. Now we have tricks on how we can use flashes of ultraviolet or infrared light, which you don't have in the sun, to the lamination that keeps everything together, to really let that release and that you can start recycle. There are, in the meanwhile, on the market, first suppliers who claim that they have panels completely recyclable, 100% recyclable. So we're going clearly in that direction, and the debonding on demand is our own technology that we are developing. And then the fourth challenge is about local production. In 2008, Germany was still kicking the ass of Asia and was doing best in making solar panels. We had a lot of plans. 2008 is also a credit crisis year, and it took only a few years until a lot of these plants moved to China. And if I look here, 2021, everywhere in the value chain, going from silicon to wafers to cells to modules, a lot is for the moment in China. And that's a good thing as well, because they helped us a lot in reducing the price, in creating synergies and making it a very low-cost technology. However, if you look now at the market, the demand that we have in Europe, and that's what you see here, 19, 20, and so on, it was in 2020 at least 20 gigawatt peak, and that's now growing still 50 gigawatt peak. It does make sense that we can supply our own markets. So we should have, again, production in Europe. It is happening. Europe is aware of this. They are making investments, and it will come eventually. But we have to be prepared, because in the end, in Europe, we have the Green Deal. By 2050, we hope to be energy neutral. It will be a difficult one. China has the same kind of projection by 2060. That already indicates 2050 is not going to be easy, but by 2060. And in the end, they could use everything they're making. So they could close the borders, and then we don't have any panels anymore, which already happened when Vladimir Putin went to Ukraine and then started to invade Ukraine. A lot of people wanted to buy solar panels and had to wait for months and months. So having European supply makes sense. A few examples in Belgium. We have Soltech on our campus. It's a rather old spin-off of imec, 1989, and they're focusing on building integrated photovoltaics. Here you see a picture of a miner, Jean-Pierre Lavarini. He unfortunately died a few years ago, but he's now on the facades of the plant that we have since 6 months on our campus. And they're making all these nice things. They have a new plant since 6 months, June last year, and they're sold out for the next 5 years. So clearly they're doing a very good job and they can even expand. Another one, N-foil. This is about flexible PV. If you go for thin film, you can make them very flexible and lightweight. And you can also make very nicely integrated applications, and you can target even applications where Soltech, using still a lot of silicon, cannot target. So we do have this spin-off, N-foil, making these kind of things, having some IP on how we can make it even flexible in size and so on, that we also want to bring to the market. Even more, perovskites has been mentioned, thin films have been mentioned. We are working on Yatta Power. Yatta Power is semi-transparent perovskites, ideal for agriculture PV, where you only typically, to grow certain crops, you don't need the full spectrum. Typically, you need like a few wavelengths to grow those crops, and all the other wavelengths you can use to create energy. That's what the idea we have with Yatta Power, and we can make very nicely large panels using perovskites. Tandem, perovskite on silicon, we have our own technology that we are developing where we avoid silver, bismuth, indium completely and do have an approach, a connection approach for perovskite on silicon. Also working on it. Just a few examples. Okay, to summarize the history and the future of PV, it has a nice history. For 50 years, it has been growing 50-fold. The same 50-fold will happen again in the next 27 years, by 2050. By the way, I'm going to retire in 2050, so it's going to be cool to see what's going to happen in the meanwhile. And because of that, we know clear challenges we are working on right now. So it's about materials, it's about integration, reliability, recyclability, and local production. To finalize, you have seen on all my slides several logos, UHasselt, imec, EnergyVille. UHasselt and imec is together imo-imomec, but I still have just a few slides on EnergyVille. EnergyVille is a research center located in Genk, and you see here are 2 buildings, are 2 labs that we have on the Torpark in Genk, having 4 different partners, University of Hasselt and imec, obviously, but also University of Leuven and Vito. In the end, we have a very simple task. We want to support and accelerate the energy transition because acceleration is welcome. We are going too slow. That's very clear. What are we doing? Well, we are focusing on about 8 topics. All topics very relevant for the energy transition. The only one we are missing for the moment, I would say, is wind energy. Working on it. But all the others we can collaborate, we have to collaborate, we have to look at each other and learn from each other. And we don't only have it at basic research, but we also have it at high technology readiness level, very applied research close to the market, and even valorization, as you have seen in a few examples. We're about 400 researchers working on these topics. This brings me to the end. There's a team working on solar, and thank you for your attention.